Welcome to Volume and Vision. There is a moment in almost every difficult journey when your mind quietly tells you that you have done enough. You have studied for an hour and your brain says stop. You have worked on your project all evening and suddenly everything feels too difficult. You have started exercising and your body tells you to slow down. You have tried to change your life and after a few unsuccessful attempts a thought appears. Maybe this is simply who I am. That thought sounds harmless, but what if it is the biggest lie you have ever believed? What if the person you are today is not the limit of what you can become? What if the weakness you think is permanent is actually a habit? What if the fear you think is protecting you is actually keeping you trapped? And what if the moment you feel like quitting is not always the end of your ability but the beginning of discovering what you are capable of? This is the deeper idea behind Never Finished by David Goggins. It is not simply about working harder. It is about refusing to become satisfied with a version of yourself that still has room to grow. Most people never discover their real capacity because they stop testing it. They create an invisible boundary in their mind. They decide how intelligent they are, how disciplined they are, how confident they are, how much pressure they can handle, and how far they can go. Then they spend years living inside those decisions. Consider a student named Rohan. He wants to become a successful software engineer. He has books, he has courses, he has access to thousands of tutorials. He even creates a perfect study timetable. But every time programming becomes difficult, he opens social media. He tells himself he will study after dinner. After dinner he feels tired. Then he promises himself that tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow arrives and the same thing happens. After several months Rohan starts believing that he is simply not good at programming. But look carefully at what happened. He never actually discovered whether he could become good at it. He only discovered that he was uncomfortable being bad at something in the beginning. There is a huge difference. Being bad at something today does not mean you are incapable of becoming good at it. It simply means you are at the beginning. Yet our minds often confuse temporary difficulty with permanent inability. And that confusion can control an entire life. The first step toward changing that pattern is honesty. Not harshness, not self-hatred, honesty. You have to be willing to look at your own behavior without creating excuses for it. Ask yourself where you are genuinely trying. Ask yourself where you are pretending to try. Ask yourself what you repeatedly avoid. Ask yourself what you say you want but rarely work for. These questions can hurt because they remove the comfortable explanations. It is easy to say I did not have enough time. Sometimes that is true. It is easy to say the circumstances were difficult. Sometimes they really were. But there are also moments when we use a true statement to hide a deeper truth. We had some time. We simply did not use it well. We had an opportunity. We were afraid to take it. We could have started. We just kept waiting for the perfect moment. Self-honesty does not mean blaming yourself for everything. Life contains real problems. Some circumstances genuinely are outside your control. But you cannot control what you refuse to acknowledge. Once you become honest about where you are, you can finally decide where to go next. And this is where the battle becomes interesting. Because the greatest opponent is often not another person. It is the voice inside your own head. That voice is extremely convincing. When something becomes difficult, it does not usually scream. It negotiates. It says you deserve a break. It says tomorrow will be better. It says you have already done enough. It says other people are naturally better than you. It says there is no point continuing. And because these thoughts sound reasonable, we obey them. But thoughts are not commands. Feeling tired is not automatically a command to quit. Feeling afraid is not automatically proof that you should stop. Feeling uncomfortable is not automatically evidence that something is wrong. Sometimes it is simply evidence that you are doing something unfamiliar. Imagine learning to speak in public. The first few attempts may feel terrible. Your voice shakes. You forget words. You become conscious of every mistake. You may want to disappear immediately. But if you continue practicing, something changes. The fear does not necessarily vanish completely. You simply become more capable of handling it. That is an important difference. Strength is not the absence of discomfort. Strength is the ability to remain effective while discomfort is present. This idea applies everywhere. When you study a difficult subject, when you learn programming, when you prepare for an interview, when you build a business, when you train your body, when you attempt something you have never done before. Growth usually begins where comfort ends. But there is something important to understand. This does not mean you should blindly push yourself until you break. Real discipline includes intelligence. If your body is injured, ignoring the injury is not courage. If you are exhausted beyond reason, refusing to recover is not automatically strength. The objective is not to destroy yourself. The objective is to expand your abilities without destroying the person who is doing the expanding. That distinction matters. There is productive discomfort and there is pointless damage. Learn the difference. Once you understand that, you can start challenging your normal stopping point. Suppose you normally study for 30 minutes. Instead of suddenly demanding 6 hours from yourself, add another 10 minutes. Suppose you normally stop when a problem becomes confusing. Stay with it a little longer. Read the question again. Break it into smaller pieces. Try another approach. Suppose you normally avoid applying for jobs because you are afraid of rejection. Send one application. You may get rejected. That rejection will hurt, but you will have learned something valuable. You can survive rejection, and that realization matters, because fear becomes weaker when experience proves that you can survive what you were afraid of. This is how invisible limits begin to move, not through one dramatic transformation, but through repeated evidence. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you collect evidence that you are becoming more reliable. Every time you continue after a setback, you collect evidence that failure does not control you. Every time you choose the difficult task over the easy distraction, you collect evidence that you have more discipline than you previously believed. Eventually your identity begins to change. You stop saying I am trying to become disciplined. You start becoming the kind of person who follows through. And that change is powerful, because your behavior eventually becomes part of your identity. But there is another enemy that appears after progress. Comfort. Comfort is useful. Rest is useful. Celebration is useful. The problem begins when comfort becomes the destination. Imagine climbing a mountain and finally reaching a beautiful viewpoint. You stop. You enjoy the view. You feel proud. And there is nothing wrong with that. But imagine spending the rest of your life standing at that exact point because you are afraid of climbing any higher. Same thing happens with personal growth. You achieve one goal and begin believing you have arrived. You get the job. You finish the degree. You become financially stable. You become fit. You learn a valuable skill. And then you slowly reduce the effort that brought you there. This is why progress requires a strange balance. You must appreciate how far you have come without convincing yourself that there is nowhere else to go. You should be proud of your progress. But you should remain curious about your potential. There is always another level of understanding. Another skill to develop. Another weakness to improve. Another challenge that can teach you something. This does not mean living in permanent dissatisfaction. It means refusing to confuse achievement with completion. There is no final version of you. You are constantly being shaped by your decisions. Every morning gives you another opportunity to reinforce the person you are becoming. And this is where discipline becomes more important than motivation. Motivation feels powerful because it creates emotion. You watch an inspiring video. You imagine your future. You feel unstoppable. You make a plan. Then the next morning arrives. The excitement is gone. Now what? This is where many people fail. They believe the absence of motivation means they should stop. But motivation was never supposed to carry the entire journey. Discipline takes over when motivation disappears. Discipline means you do not ask yourself every morning whether you feel like doing what matters. You already decided. You simply follow through. Of course your plan should be flexible. Life changes. Unexpected responsibilities appear. Sometimes you need rest. Sometimes you need to change direction. But there is a difference between adjusting intelligently and abandoning yourself whenever something becomes uncomfortable. One protects your long-term progress. The other protects your short-term comfort. And short-term comfort can become extremely expensive. Think about the person who constantly postpones learning a useful skill. 1 week does not seem important. 1 month does not seem important. 1 year can still feel recoverable. But eventually several years have passed. And the person is standing in the same place wondering where the time went. Procrastination rarely feels dangerous while you are doing it. That is why it is so powerful. It gives you comfort now and sends the bill to your future self. It is also true. Discipline often feels unpleasant now but gives something valuable to your future self. 1 hour of focused learning may feel difficult today, but the knowledge can help you for years. One workout may feel exhausting today, but consistent training can transform your physical capacity. One difficult conversation may feel frightening today, but avoiding it can create a much larger problem tomorrow. The choices you make repeatedly become the direction of your life. This is why small actions deserve more respect than they usually receive. People love dramatic transformations. They want the before and after. They want the overnight success story. But real transformation is usually quiet. It happens on ordinary mornings, ordinary afternoons, ordinary evenings. When nobody is watching, you choose to continue. Then you do it again, and again, and again. Eventually people notice the result, but they do not see the thousands of invisible decisions that created it. Another important idea is leaving the familiar version of yourself behind. Your comfort zone is not necessarily a physical location. It can be a pattern. You always avoid difficult conversations. You always choose easy assignments. You always compare yourself with others. You always quit when progress becomes slow. You always wait until you feel motivated. You always find a reason to postpone the important work. These patterns become comfortable because they are familiar. And the brain often prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar possibility. That is why change can feel threatening even when the current situation is making you unhappy. You know the current version of your life. You do not know what the new version will look like. So the mind says stay where you are. At least you understand this place. But growth requires experimentation. You have to enter situations where you are not immediately good. You have to be willing to look inexperienced. You have to tolerate mistakes. You have to allow yourself to be a beginner. This is difficult because our ego wants competence immediately. We want to be good without being bad first. We want confidence without embarrassment. We want success without rejection. We want strength without struggle. But reality does not work that way. A beginner looks awkward. A beginner makes mistakes. A beginner asks basic questions. A beginner fails. And that is completely normal. The danger is not being a beginner. The danger is refusing to be one because your ego cannot tolerate looking imperfect. Think about a child learning to ride a bicycle. The child falls, gets back up, tries again, falls again. There is no complicated philosophy. The child simply has not learned that falling means stop forever. Somewhere along the way, adults become different. We experience failure and immediately attach meaning to it. I failed, therefore I am not capable. Someone rejected me, therefore I am not valuable. I struggled, therefore this is not for me. But failure can mean something much simpler. Your current approach did not work. That is information. Use it. Change the approach. Try again. The person who keeps learning from failure eventually develops an advantage over the person who avoids failure completely. Because avoiding failure also means avoiding many opportunities. You cannot guarantee success, but you can become more capable of handling failure. And that changes everything. When failure stops being something you must avoid at all costs, you become willing to attempt bigger things. You apply, you build, you speak, you learn, you compete, you create, you begin. And beginning is often the hardest part. There are invisible walls inside the mind. Some were built by past failures. Some were built by other people's opinions. Some were built by fear. Some were built by comparison. And some were built by your own repeated excuses. The first step is noticing them. Listen carefully to the sentences you repeat. I am not smart enough. I am too old. I am too young. I am not confident. I don't have enough time. I always fail. I cannot stay consistent. I am just lazy. These statements can feel like facts, but many of them are conclusions. And conclusions can be questioned. Instead of saying I cannot do this, ask what would I need to learn to do this. Instead of saying I am not disciplined, ask what small routine could help me become more disciplined. Instead of saying I always fail, ask what pattern keeps causing the same failure. The wording matters because questions create possibilities. Statements can create prisons. When you begin questioning your own assumptions, the walls start becoming visible. And once you can see a wall, you can decide whether it actually needs to remain there. You may discover that some limitations are real. You may not have unlimited time. You may have responsibilities. You may have financial limitations. You may have physical limitations. You may face circumstances that other people do not. Acknowledging those realities is not weakness. It is strategy. You do not need to pretend that every person has the same starting point. You simply need to stop adding imaginary limitations to the real ones. Work with reality, then expand what is possible inside it. This is where personal responsibility becomes powerful. Responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for everything that happens. It means focusing your energy on what you can influence. You cannot control what somebody thinks about you. You can control how you respond. You cannot control whether an interviewer selects you. You can control how prepared you are. You cannot control whether a particular opportunity appears. You can control whether you are ready when one appears. You cannot control yesterday, but you can influence tomorrow. And the more attention you give to what is within your control, the less power helplessness has over you. Eventually you stop waiting for your circumstances to become perfect. You start working with what you have. That is another form of strength. Not having ideal conditions, but still moving forward. And perhaps this is the most important lesson to carry from this entire philosophy. You do not need to become the strongest person in the world. You do not need to prove yourself to everyone. You do not need to live every day at maximum intensity. You need to become more honest about your potential and more consistent about developing it. There will be days when you are strong. There will be days when you are tired. There will be days when you make progress. And days when you move backward. There will be moments when you feel unstoppable. And moments when you question everything. That does not make you weak. It makes you human. The goal is not perfection. The goal is continuation. When you fall, learn. When you fail, adjust. When you succeed, stay humble. When you become comfortable, explore again. When fear appears, examine it. And when your mind tells you that you are finished, ask one final question. Finished according to whom? Because perhaps you have mistaken exhaustion for the end. Perhaps you have mistaken fear for inability. Perhaps you have mistaken one failure for an identity. Perhaps you have mistaken today's ability for tomorrow's potential. You are not required to know exactly how far you can go. You only need the courage to take the next step and discover it. So tonight, before you sleep, think about one area of your life where you have been telling yourself the same limiting story. Maybe it is your education. Maybe your career. Maybe your health. Maybe your confidence. Maybe something you have postponed for years. Do not promise yourself that tomorrow you will completely transform your life. Make a smaller promise. Choose one action. One uncomfortable action that moves you in the right direction. Then keep that promise. Tomorrow, make another, and then another, because eventually those small promises become habits. Those habits become evidence. That evidence changes your identity. And your identity influences your future. You may discover that the person you thought you were was only the person you had practiced being. And if that is true, then you can practice becoming someone different. Stronger, more disciplined, more capable, more honest, more resilient, not perfect, never perfect, but always developing. That is why the journey does not really end when you reach a goal. A goal can have an ending. But growth does not have to. There will always be another lesson, another challenge, another weakness to understand, another opportunity to become better. And that is not something to fear. It is something to embrace. Because the greatest danger is not discovering that you have limits. The greatest danger is creating limits before you have even tested yourself. So keep learning, keep questioning, keep moving, keep challenging the version of yourself that says you cannot. And remember, you are allowed to celebrate how far you have come. But you do not have to stop there. Because as long as there is something left to learn, something left to improve, and something left to discover within yourself, you are never finished. This was Volume and Vision. If this narration gave you even one idea worth carrying into your life, subscribe to Volume and Vision for more thoughtful and informative book-based narrations. And the next time that familiar voice tells you that you have reached your limit, do not immediately believe it. Take a breath, look at the road ahead, and take one more meaningful step.